Imagine this, you're at the very heart of the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople, a city shimmering with gold and steeped in the ancient dust of empires, yet one teetering on the precipice of utter collapse. You stand in the Hippodrome, a vast, echoing arena designed for spectacles of speed and daring, but now it is a cauldron of chaos. The air is thick with the stench of burning wood, of panicked horses, of human fear and raw fury. The Nika riots have consumed the capital, not just a rebellion, but a monstrous living thing devouring everything in its path. From the safety, or rather the gilded cage, of the imperial box, you gaze down upon the surging, bloodthirsty mob. They are not just rioters, they are the very soul of the city, the blues and the greens, factions that once merely cheered for chariot races, now united in a terrifying singular roar, Nika! They have crowned a new emperor, a pretender, and their torches lick at the very foundations of the great palace. The city is alight, a funeral pyre for an empire. Beside you, Emperor Justinian, the mighty Augustus, the man who dreamed of restoring Rome's ancient glory, is a shattered figure. His face is ashen, his hands tremble, his grand vision dissolving into ash before his very eyes. His advisors, men of noble birth and ancient lineage, whisper of escape, of fleeing by ship, of abandoning the city to its fate. Their voices are hushed, laced with desperation, their eyes darting towards the escape routes. The future of Byzantium hangs by a thread, a single frayed strand. Then a voice, sharp and clear, cuts through the despair, a voice that commands attention, a voice that silences the murmuring men. It belongs to the Empress. She stands not as a queen bedecked in jewels, but as a warrior forged in fire. Her eyes, usually pools of dark, enigmatic allure, now burn with an unyielding flame. Her posture is erect, unyielding, a stark contrast to the slumped shoulders of the men around her. She looks at Justinian, at his trembling advisors, with a gaze that is less judgment and more utter profound contempt for their cowardice. "If flight were the only means of safety," she declares, her words echoing through the tense chamber, "then I would not flee. Those who have worn the crown should never survive its loss. If you wish to fly, Emperor, then fly. You have the money, the ships, the way is clear. But I will stay. I will not live to see the day when I am not saluted as Empress. The purple makes a fine shroud." Her words are a slap, a challenge, a testament to a resolve so absolute it chills the bone. It is not the speech of a woman born to palaces and silk, but of one who has stared into the abyss of human cruelty and emerged, not broken, but sharpened. It is the declaration of a woman who knows what it means to lose everything, to be stripped bare, and to claw her way back with teeth and nails. It is the voice of Theodora, Empress of the East, and in that moment, she is not merely Justinian's wife, but the true, indomitable will of the empire. How could a woman, born into the gutters of a brutal city subjected to the most dehumanizing experiences imaginable, rise to such heights of power and wield it with such terrifying, unyielding resolve? How did the degradation of her early life not break her, but rather forge within her an iron will, a strategic mind, and a ruthless determination that would save an empire and shape history forever? To understand the Empress, the formidable Theodora, we must journey back, far beyond the gilded cages of the Great Palace and the desperate cries of the Nika riots. We must strip away the layers of imperial grandeur, the silk robes, the pearl-encrusted crowns, and descend into the grimy, vibrant, and often cruel underbelly of 6th century Constantinople. It is here, amidst the dust and clamour of the Hippodrome's periphery, that her story truly begins, not as a queen, but as a child, fragile and vulnerable, yet possessing an innate spark that refused to be extinguished. Her name was Theodora, and she entered the world around 500 AD, not in the stately chambers of the aristocracy, but in the humble transient dwelling of a bearkeeper for the green faction of the Hippodrome. Her father, Acacius, was a man of the people, his days spent wrestling with bears and managing the elaborate spectacles that enthralled the masses. Her mother, whose name history is largely forgotten, was likely a dancer or an actress, a woman of the theatrical world, accustomed to the fleeting applause and the harsh realities that lay beneath the painted smiles. Theodora had 2 sisters, Comito and Anastasia, and their early lives were a kaleidoscope of vivid colours and rough textures. The roar of the crowd, the smell of animal musk and sawdust, the triumphant blare of trumpets, the whispered gossip of the performers, and the constant gnawing uncertainty of where the next meal would come from. Life in the Hippodrome, for those on its fringes, was a precarious dance on the edge of poverty. It was a world of fleeting fame and instant obsolescence, where a performer's livelihood depended entirely on the fickle tastes of the crowd and the whims of powerful patrons. For Theodora, childhood was not a time of sheltered innocence. Instead, it was an accelerated education in human nature, a crash course in the brutal mechanics of power and survival. She watched her father, a man respected for his skills, yet ultimately beholden to the powerful factions who controlled the games. She saw the performers, often beautiful and talented, used and discarded, their brief moments in the spotlight followed by lonely obscurity. This environment, raw and unforgiving, taught her early on that beauty was currency, talent was a tool, and vulnerability was a fatal weakness. The true turning point, the first psychological wound that would begin to shape the formidable woman she would become, struck when she was still a young girl, perhaps no more than 5 or 6 years old. Her father, Acacius, died suddenly. The exact cause is lost to time, but his death plunged the small family into immediate, desperate poverty. In the highly stratified society of Byzantium, without a male protector, women and children were often left utterly exposed, their futures dictated by the mercy, or lack thereof, of others. Theodora's mother, a woman of courage born of necessity, found herself in an impossible situation. Her husband's position as bearkeeper for the Greens was coveted, and upon his death it was immediately offered to another. Desperate to secure her daughter's futures, to prevent them from slipping into the abyss of destitution that swallowed so many fatherless girls, she took her children to the Hippodrome. There, before the roaring crowd, before the very leaders of the Green faction, she laid her daughters at their feet, a silent, heartbreaking plea for compassion, for the reinstatement of her husband's position, for anything that would offer them a lifeline. The Greens, however, were unmoved. Their allegiances were to their own, and a widow and her young daughters offered no political advantage, no spectacle, no power. They refused her. The crushing rejection, the public humiliation, the stark realization of their utter powerlessness in the face of indifference left an indelible mark on young Theodora. She saw her mother, a woman who had always seemed strong, reduced to begging. She saw the cold, unfeeling faces of the men who held their fate in their hands. In that moment, a seed of resentment, a burning desire for agency, for control, for a day when no one could ever refuse her again, took root deep within her soul. But that wasn't the end of the story, not for Theodora's mother. The Blues, the rival faction, witnessing the Greens' callousness, saw an opportunity. In a calculated act of both charity and political maneuvering, they offered Acacius's position to another man, but promised to support Theodora's family. It was a lifeline, but it came with its own set of chains, binding the family to the whims of a new, equally demanding patron. Theodora learned another harsh lesson. Kindness often came with a price, and even acts of benevolence were steeped in power dynamics. She would never forget the feeling of being an object of pity, a pawn in a larger game. As Theodora grew, her innate intelligence and striking beauty became undeniable. Her older sister, Comito, was already performing with a mime troupe, a common path for girls of their station. It was a world of public performance, of laughter and applause, but also of grueling practice, meagre pay, and the constant unspoken threat of exploitation. Theodora, driven by necessity and perhaps a burgeoning desire to control her own narrative, soon joined her sister on the stage. The mime troupe was not the sophisticated theatrical world of the Roman past. By the 6th century, mime had devolved into something far coarser, a blend of physical comedy, bawdy jokes, and often explicit displays designed to titillate the audience. The performances were less about dramatic art and more about spectacle, often involving partial nudity and suggestive acts. For a young woman, particularly one as beautiful and quick-witted as Theodora, this environment was a crucible. It demanded a certain brazenness, a willingness to expose oneself, both literally and figuratively, to the gaze of the crowd. It was here, amidst the crude humour and the leering eyes of the audience, that Theodora began to hone her skills. She learned to read a crowd, to understand what people wanted, to command attention, to project an aura of confidence even when her stomach gnawed with hunger. She developed an incredible stage presence, a magnetic charm that captivated those who watched her. But beneath the dazzling smile and the agile movements, there was a growing awareness of the transactional nature of her existence. Her body, her beauty, her performance, these were commodities. The psychological genesis of the Empress Theodora, the why behind her later ruthlessness and unshakable will, lies precisely in this period. The constant objectification, the casual degradation, the transactional nature of her early life in the entertainment world, and later as a courtesan, became the crucible that forged her indomitable spirit. This was not merely a phase in her life, it was the foundational trauma, the deep-seated wound that would shape every decision, every ambition, every act of power she would later undertake. For Theodora, life as a mime and then a courtesan was a brutal education in power. She was not merely performing, she was studying. She observed the men who frequented the hippodrome, the wealthy patrons, the powerful officials, the dissolute sons of senators. She saw their desires, their weaknesses, their hypocrisies. She learned to discern genuine affection from cynical exploitation, to navigate the treacherous currents of male desire, to use her beauty and wit as tools for survival and advancement. Each forced smile, each lewd gesture, each whispered promise chipped away at her innocence, but simultaneously hardened her resolve. She understood that in a world where women, especially those of her station, were often treated as objects, the only way to gain agency was to master the very game that sought to diminish her. The historians of the era, particularly the notoriously biased Procopius, painted a vivid, if often sensationalized picture of Theodora's early years. He described her performances as scandalous, going so far as to claim she engaged in acts of simulated sex on stage, and that her gifts were freely available to anyone with the means to pay. While Procopius's accounts are undeniably coloured by his personal animosity towards Theodora and Justinian, and likely exaggerate for dramatic effect, they nonetheless reflect the general perception of women in her profession during that time. The line between actress, dancer, and prostitute was often blurred, and the social stigma was profound. Theodora lived in a world where her body was not entirely her own. She was exposed to the rawest forms of human desire, to the casual cruelty of men who saw her as little more than a plaything. This constant exposure to degradation, to the objectification of her very being, bred within her a profound contempt for hypocrisy, a fierce desire for self-preservation, and an unparalleled understanding of the hidden levers of power. She learned to anticipate, to manipulate, to observe, and most importantly, to endure. The horrible sexual practices were not just acts, they were lessons in the brutal realities of a patriarchal society. Lessons that taught her to value control above all else, and to never again allow herself to be powerless. The constant need to please, to perform, to survive by her wits and her looks instilled in her a cunning intelligence and a remarkable resilience. She understood the art of persuasion, the subtle dance of negotiation, the importance of appearances, and the absolute necessity of keeping her true thoughts hidden. She was forced to become a chameleon, adapting to every situation, every client, every demand. This was not a life chosen, but a life endured, and in that endurance a steel core formed within her. She was a survivor, hardened by the very experiences that would have broken lesser individuals. She absorbed the lessons of the streets, the back alleys, the theatrical stages, and the private chambers. She saw the corruption, the venality, the moral decay beneath the veneer of Byzantine society, and in seeing it she learned how to navigate it, how to exploit it, and ultimately how to transcend it. The stigma of her past, the whispers and the sneers, became not a burden, but a shield, a constant reminder of what she had overcome and what she would never allow herself to become again, a victim. Her journey from the dust of the hippodrome to the throne of an empire would be a testament to this incredible, terrifying resolve. Here's where it gets truly dark. The life of a courtesan, however glamorous it might appear on the surface, was fraught with peril. It was a life lived on the edge, where one misstep, one loss of favour could mean destitution, violence, or worse. Theodora, however, was not content to merely survive. She had an unquenchable thirst for something more, a drive that transcended the immediate gratification of wealth or pleasure. She understood that true power lay beyond the fleeting embrace of a wealthy patron. It lay in the ability to dictate her own terms, to control her own destiny, to never again be dependent on the whims of others. Around the age of 16, Theodora embarked on a journey that marked a pivotal shift in her life. She accompanied a wealthy Syrian official, a man named Hysebulus, on his travels to Pentapolis in North Africa, where he had been appointed governor. This was not a romantic escapade, but a calculated move, a chance to escape the suffocating confines of Constantinople and to broaden her horizons. The journey itself was an education, exposing her to different cultures, different ways of life, and the vastness of the Byzantine Empire. However, the relationship with Hysebulus eventually soured. The reasons are unclear. Perhaps a clash of wills, perhaps his waning interest, or perhaps Theodora's growing ambition. Whatever the cause, she found herself abandoned, alone and without resources, in a foreign land. This was a moment of profound vulnerability, a test of all the street smarts and resilience she had accumulated. She could have crumbled, could have fallen back into the desperate life she had known. But Theodora was not one to yield. She would not allow herself to become a victim again. She journeyed through the cities of the East, Alexandria, Antioch. It was during this period that something within her began to shift, a profound internal transformation. In Alexandria, a city renowned for its intellectual and theological fervour, she encountered the teachings of the Monophysites. This Christian sect held a different view of Christ's nature than the dominant Chalcedonian orthodoxy of Constantinople. They believed Christ had one divine nature, rather than two distinct ones, divine and human. For Theodora, this was more than just theological debate. It was a revelation. The Monophysites, often persecuted by the imperial church, preached a message of compassion, of justice for the oppressed, of spiritual purity. For a woman who had lived a life of constant compromise, of moral ambiguity, of being judged and condemned by society, this message resonated deeply. It offered a path to redemption, a chance to shed the weight of her past, to find a sense of dignity and purpose that no amount of wealth or fleeting pleasure could provide. Whether her conversion was entirely spiritual or also a shrewd understanding of the political landscape, monophysitism had a strong following in the eastern provinces. It marked a distinct turning point. She began to live a life of greater austerity, embracing the teachings of the sect and cultivating an image of piety and intellectual engagement. This was Theodora, the chameleon, transforming herself once more, not just for survival, but for a higher ambition. Her journey eventually led her back to Constantinople, around 522 AD, a changed woman. She was no longer the brazen mime, the vivacious courtesan. She was still beautiful, perhaps even more so, but her beauty was now imbued with a quiet dignity, a profound wisdom etched into her eyes, a certain gravitas that drew people in. She settled into a modest house, living a life of quiet respectability, a testament to her remarkable ability to reinvent herself. It was around this time that she encountered Justinian. He was not yet emperor, but a rising star in the Byzantine court, a man of formidable intellect, ambition, and a burning desire to restore the glories of the Roman Empire. He was the nephew of Emperor Justin I, an aging and largely illiterate soldier who had risen through the ranks to claim the throne. Justinian, his designated heir, was already the de facto ruler, wielding immense power behind the scenes. Justinian, a man of austere habits and a scholar's mind, was captivated by Theodora. He was known for his celibacy and his devotion to his work, so his fascination with a woman of Theodora's past was shocking to many. But Theodora was not just beautiful, she was intelligent, witty, articulate, and possessed a depth of experience that most women of the court, sheltered and naive, could never match. She had seen the world in its rawest form, understood human nature in all its complexities, and possessed a strength of character that was utterly unique. She had a mind that could match his own, a strategic acumen born of necessity, and a fierce loyalty that, once earned, was unwavering. Their courtship was scandalous, a whispered scandal throughout the gilded halls of the great palace. Theodora's past, particularly the explicit details recorded by Procopius, made her an utterly unsuitable match for a man of Justinian's standing, let alone a future emperor. Roman law explicitly forbade senators from marrying actresses, a law designed to maintain the purity of the aristocratic bloodline and to prevent the infiltration of undesirable elements into the ruling class. Justinian, however, was undeterred. His love, or perhaps his profound admiration and recognition of her extraordinary capabilities, was absolute. He saw beyond the societal condemnation, beyond the whispers, to the formidable woman beneath. But that wasn't even the worst part. Justinian's aunt, the Empress Euphemia, and many of the court's most powerful figures vehemently opposed the match. They saw Theodora as a stain on the imperial legacy, a dangerous precedent, a threat to the established order. Theodora, however, understood the game. She knew how to navigate these treacherous waters, how to charm, how to persuade, how to subtly undermine her detractors. She won over key figures, demonstrating her intelligence and her genuine desire to contribute to the empire. Ultimately, Justinian's devotion proved stronger than any opposition. He persuaded his uncle, Emperor Justin III, to amend the law specifically for Theodora, allowing a senator to marry an actress if she had reformed her life. It was an unprecedented act, a testament to Justinian's will and Theodora's magnetic influence. In 525 AD, Justinian and Theodora were married. 3 years later, when Justin I died, Justinian ascended to the imperial throne, and with him, Theodora became Empress of the East. The girl from the hippodrome, the mime, the courtesan, was now the most powerful woman in the world. Her transformation from social pariah to empress was complete, but the psychological scars of her past, the lessons learned in the crucible of degradation, remained. They did not weaken her. They empowered her. They gave her an unparalleled understanding of human weakness and strength, of loyalty and betrayal, of the mechanisms of power that operated beneath the polished surface of society. She would use these lessons, honed in the harshest of schools, to become one of history's most effective and indeed most dangerous empresses. What happened next would haunt him forever and solidify Theodora's legend. The first real test of their joint reign, and Theodora's iron will, came in January 532 AD, barely 5 years into Justinian's rule. It was the Nika riots, the terrifying conflagration that threatened to tear Constantinople and the entire empire apart. The riots began, as so many things did in Byzantium, in the hippodrome. The chariot races were not mere sport. They were deeply intertwined with politics, religion, and social identity. The two main factions, the Blues and the Greens, were more like political parties with armed street gangs, their rivalries often spilling into violence. Justinian, in an attempt to curb their excesses, had executed some members of both factions. This enraged the populace, who saw it as an overreach of imperial power. During a race, the factions united, shouting "Nika! Conquer!" The chant quickly transformed from a sporting slogan into a revolutionary cry. The mob swelled, joined by disgruntled senators, common citizens fed up with high taxes, and those who simply wanted to see Justinian overthrown. For 5 days, Constantinople burned. Churches, palaces, public buildings, all were consumed by the flames. The great palace itself was under siege. Thousands were killed in the streets. Emperor Justinian, his grand ambitions crumbling before his eyes, was paralyzed by fear and indecision. His advisors, the noblemen whose families had served emperors for generations, urged him to flee. They argued that the situation was hopeless, that the mob was too powerful, that their lives were at stake. They had ships ready, loaded with treasure, waiting to spirit the imperial couple away to safety. Justinian, a man of intellect and vision, but lacking the raw, visceral courage of a street fighter, was on the verge of capitulating. He saw his dream of a restored Roman Empire turning to ash. It was in this moment of utter despair amidst the smoke and the screams that Theodora stepped forward. Her past, the very experiences that society had condemned, now became her greatest strength. She had known fear, degradation, poverty, and the constant threat of violence. She had learned to survive, to fight, to never give up, even when all hope seemed lost. She had seen men buckle under pressure, and she had learned to stand firm. Her declaration, "The purple makes a fine shroud," was not just a dramatic statement. It was a profound articulation of her core belief forged in the fires of her youth. To flee, to abandon the throne, would be to return to a state of powerlessness, a state she had sworn never to revisit. It would mean becoming an object of pity once more, a refugee, stripped of dignity and control. She would rather die an empress than live as a common woman again. Her life had taught her that true power lay not in flight but in defiant endurance, in facing down the threat, no matter how terrifying. Her words shamed Justinian, igniting a spark of his former resolve. They galvanized the remaining loyalists. Theodora's unyielding stance gave them courage, a focal point in the storm of the chaos. General Belisarius, Justinian's most brilliant military commander, who had also been ready to flee, was inspired by her unwavering spirit. He and his fellow general Mundus quickly formulated a plan. Under the cover of night, Belisarius and Mundus, along with their loyal troops, descended upon the hippodrome, where the rioters had gathered to crown their new emperor. The gates were sealed. The imperial troops, fueled by Theodora's defiance and Justinian's revived command, fell upon the unsuspecting mob. The ensuing massacre was horrific, a bloodbath that stained the hippodrome crimson. Tens of thousands were slaughtered, their bodies piled high in the arena where Theodora had once performed. The Nika riots, which had threatened to end an empire, were brutally, decisively crushed. The aftermath solidified Theodora's position as a co-ruler, not just a consort. Justinian recognized her indispensable role in saving his throne. From that moment on, she was his equal, wielding power with an authority that few empresses before or since could claim. Her name appeared alongside his in laws and official decrees. She held court independently, received foreign dignitaries, and influenced policy on every level. Her past, once a source of shame and scandal, now became a wellspring of unique insight. Having lived among the marginalized, she understood the struggles of the poor and the vulnerable. She used her power to enact reforms that, ironically, protected women in ways that her own early life had never known. She championed laws against forced prostitution, established convents as refuges for former courtesans, and improved divorce laws for women. She understood that many women were driven into her former profession not by choice, but by desperation, and she sought to provide alternatives, to offer them the dignity she had once been denied. This was not merely an act of benevolence, it was a testament to her profound understanding of the systemic vulnerabilities that trapped women in such lives. She knew from searing personal experience the human cost of being an object, and she sought to dismantle the structures that perpetuated such suffering. Theodora also played a crucial role in the religious politics of the empire, particularly in her steadfast support of monophysitism. While Justinian, for political reasons, publicly adhered to the Chalcedonian orthodoxy, Theodora secretly championed the monophysite cause, offering protection to its clergy and providing refuge for its adherents within the palace itself. This dual approach allowed the empire to maintain a delicate balance, placating both sides while Theodora pursued her own deeply held beliefs. Her commitment to monophysitism was not just theological, it was deeply personal, rooted in her experience of finding solace and a sense of belonging within a persecuted sect during her darkest hours. It was another way for her to challenge the established order that had once condemned her. But Theodora's influence extended far beyond social reforms and religious patronage. Her political acumen was formidable. She established her own network of spies and informants, ensuring that she was always aware of plots and intrigues within the court. She was ruthless in dealing with her enemies, displaying a cold, calculating efficiency that unnerved even the most hardened senators. Those who crossed her often found themselves stripped of their titles, their wealth, or even their lives. Her personal experience of vulnerability had taught her that mercy could be a luxury, and that survival often demanded a swift, decisive hand. Here's where it gets truly dark. Theodora had a specific target for her wrath, anyone who sought to undermine her authority, or worse, to remind her of her past. Procopius, in his Secret History, a scathing exposé published posthumously, details numerous instances of Theodora's cruelty and vindictiveness. He describes how she systematically destroyed powerful officials and their families, often on trumped-up charges, simply because they had once slighted her or questioned her legitimacy. While Procopius's account is a venomous smear campaign, it nonetheless reflects the fear and awe in which Theodora was held. Her past, her horrible sexual practices, was a weapon wielded against her by her enemies, but she, in turn, wielded her power like a sharpened blade against them. She understood that power was not just about control, but about absolute dominance, about crushing any whisper of dissent, any challenge to her hard-won authority. One chilling example of her ruthlessness, as recounted by Procopius, involved a general named Artabanes. He was a distinguished commander, but Theodora suspected him of plotting against Justinian. She orchestrated a complex scheme involving a former lover of Artabanes to entrap him. The plan succeeded, and Artabanes was swiftly arrested. Many others suffered similar fates. Theodora did not forget, and she did not forgive. Every slight, every insult, every attempt to diminish her was stored away, to be repaid with interest when the opportunity arose. This was the vengeance of a woman who had been humiliated and scorned, now in a position to turn the tables on those who had once held power over her. Her relationship with Justinian was a complex tapestry of profound love, mutual respect, and shared ambition. They were an inseparable pair, often working side by side on imperial business. Justinian relied heavily on her counsel, trusting her judgment implicitly, especially in matters of political intrigue and diplomacy. He saw her as his indispensable partner, the strong hand that could make the difficult decisions he sometimes hesitated to make. Their partnership was arguably one of the most effective in imperial history, a true diarchy where two powerful wills converged for the good of the empire, albeit through methods that were often brutal and uncompromising. Theodora's impact on the Byzantine Empire was monumental. She was not merely a symbol, she was an active, driving force behind many of the era's most significant achievements. While Justinian focused on military conquests and legal reforms, his famous Corpus Juris Civilis, Theodora often handled the internal politics, the religious factions, and the intricate web of court intrigue. She was the one who ensured stability at home, allowing Justinian to pursue his grand vision of restoring the Roman Empire. Her legacy is, therefore, a paradox. She was a champion of women's rights, a protector of the poor, and a devout patron of her chosen faith. Yet she was also a ruthless politician, a vengeful enemy, and a figure who inspired both awe and terror. She was a woman of immense contradictions, forged by a life that demanded constant reinvention, constant struggle, and a relentless pursuit of power in a world that sought to deny it to her. The climax of Theodora's story is not a single dramatic event, but rather the culmination of her life's work, a slow, relentless ascent and an unwavering grip on power that reshaped the very fabric of Byzantium. Her passing, when it finally came, was not in battle or by assassination, but from an illness, likely cancer, around 548 AD. Yet even in her final years, her influence remained undiminished, her will as sharp as ever. To truly grasp the enduring power of Theodora, one must look beyond the grand narratives of conquest and law and delve into the quiet, often overlooked corners of society where her impact was most deeply felt. Her reforms for women, born from the bitter soil of her own early life, were revolutionary. She understood, with a clarity few others possessed, that the vulnerability of women, particularly those without male protectors, was not an abstract legal problem, but a crushing daily reality. Consider the plight of a young girl, perhaps no older than Theodora herself when her father died, orphaned and destitute in the sprawling, unforgiving city. Before Theodora, such a child's path was often tragically predetermined, a life of forced labour or worse, forced prostitution. Theodora, however, established institutions that offered a lifeline. She founded the Metanoia, a grand convent on the Asian side of the Bosphorus, a sanctuary specifically for women who had been forced into prostitution and sought to escape their circumstances. Imagine the relief, the sheer, unimaginable hope these women must have felt, knowing there was a place where they could find refuge, dignity, and a chance at a new life, free from the brutal whims of men. This was not a mere charitable act. It was a deeply personal crusade, a direct affront to the very system that had once exploited her. She ensured these convents were generously endowed, providing not just shelter, but education and purpose. She understood that true freedom required economic independence and spiritual solace, not just a roof over one's head. Furthermore, Theodora pushed for significant changes to marriage and divorce laws. She made it easier for women to divorce abusive or negligent husbands, a radical concept in a society where a woman's identity was so often tied to her husband's. She also strengthened penalties for rape and abduction, offences often treated lightly in the male-dominated legal system. These were not abstract legal codes to her. They were safeguards, born from the haunting memories of her own precarious youth, from the casual male entitlement she had witnessed and endured. Every line of these new laws was, in a way, a silent scream against the injustices she had faced, a protective embrace for those who might otherwise walk her old path. She made it illegal for men to force women into roles they did not choose, a direct blow against the kind of forced servitude that had defined parts of her own story. Her passionate advocacy for monophysitism, often at odds with Justinian's public stance, was another profound expression of her past. The Monophysites, an often persecuted Christian sect, resonated with Theodora's own sense of being an outsider, an underdog. In the ornate gilded chambers of the Great Palace, Theodora often provided safe harbour to Monophysite bishops and theologians, effectively creating a parallel religious court within the empire's very heart. She protected them from imperial persecution, ensuring their survival and influencing theological discourse. This was not merely political manoeuvring, it was a deep-seated spiritual conviction, a quiet rebellion against the dominant orthodoxy that, in her view, often prioritized power over compassion. She understood the feeling of being judged, marginalized and condemned by the powerful, and she extended her protection to those who shared that experience, even if their condemnation was theological rather than social. Yet, alongside this compassionate reformer existed the ruthless Empress, the woman who never forgot a slight, who wielded her power with an unsparing hand. Her political enemies learned this lesson the hard way. The story of Artabanes, while one example reflects a broader pattern. There was the Praetorian prefect John the Cappadocian, a powerful and corrupt official whom Justinian himself found indispensable, yet utterly despised. Theodora orchestrated his downfall with surgical precision, using a false accusation and an elaborate trap to expose his disloyalty and greed. He was exiled, stripped of his wealth and power, a testament to Theodora's ability to manipulate the most formidable figures in the empire. She did not merely remove obstacles, she utterly annihilated them, ensuring they could never rise again to threaten her or Justinian. Her network of spies, often women, was formidable. They infiltrated every level of society, bringing her intelligence that even Justinian's official channels sometimes missed. She understood that information was power, and that discretion was paramount. She could be charming and gracious, disarming her targets with her wit and beauty, only to strike with devastating force when they least expected it. This duality, the compassionate protector and the merciless strategist, was the hallmark of her reign, a direct consequence of a life spent navigating extremes. In her private moments, away from the glittering court and the constant demands of empire, one can only imagine the thoughts that must have haunted Theodora. Did the smells of the hippodrome ever waft back to her memory? Did the leering faces of her past audiences ever flicker in the shadows of her opulent chambers? Did she ever reflect on the irony of her journey, from the public spectacle of degradation to the sacred, almost divine reverence accorded to an empress? Perhaps these memories were not ghosts to be feared, but rather constant reminders, fuel for her ambition, justification for her ruthlessness, and a deep-seated empathy for those still trapped in the despair she had escaped. Her past was not just a historical footnote, it was the very engine of her present, a constant hum beneath the surface of her imperial majesty. It was the wellspring of her strength, her cunning, and her unwavering determination to never again be a pawn in someone else's game. Her legacy, therefore, is not simple. It is a universal thesis on the transformative power of trauma and the complex nature of human ambition. Theodora's life demonstrates that the most profound wounds, the deepest humiliations, can, in certain individuals, forge an indomitable will, a relentless drive not just for survival, but for absolute control. Her horrible sexual practices, the degradation she endured, did not break her. They sharpened her, honed her understanding of power dynamics, and instilled in her an unshakable resolve to never again be powerless. Her story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, that immense suffering can breed both profound compassion and terrifying cruelty. Theodora, the defender of abused women, was also the ruthless destroyer of political rivals. She was a product of her brutal times, but she also transcended them, using the very societal forces that sought to diminish her as stepping stones to unprecedented power. Her journey from the gutters to the throne is a testament to the fact that power, once attained, can be wielded to both uplift and destroy, to heal old wounds and to inflict new ones. Theodora's life serves as a stark reminder that history is often shaped not just by emperors and generals, but by individuals who, against all odds, refuse to be defined by their origins or their past suffering. Her reign, alongside Justinian's, was a golden age for Byzantium, a period of immense legal, architectural, and military achievement. And at the heart of it all, the fierce, unyielding will of a woman who had seen the worst of humanity and in doing so learned how to master it. Her story resonates across the centuries, a powerful echo of resilience, ambition, and the enduring human struggle for dignity and control even when faced with the most tortured of histories.